Boone Carter sat at his kitchen table staring down at the yellowed letter in his hands. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room, but it did little to warm the chill that had settled in his bones over the past few years. His only companion, a scruffy dog named Rusty, lay near the stove, its tail thumping lazily against the wooden floor. The letter had arrived without warning, bearing a name Boone had never heard before: Malachi Brooks. There was something in the name that sent an odd shiver down Boone's spine, but he couldn't put his finger on why. It wasn't like him to expect anything, least of all a letter, but there it was. The only thing that separated him from another day of endless work and worry was this thin, creased piece of paper. "Who's it from, Papa?" Clarabelle, his 10-year-old daughter, had appeared at the door. Her eyes, always curious and full of life, studied him as he held the letter. Boone glanced at her, his eyes tired from years of hard work and hardship. "It's from someone I've never heard of. A man named Malachi Brooks." He paused. "Someone who thinks I have a ranch now." He handed her the letter, watching as she squinted at the handwriting. Her young voice spoke before he could stop her. "Papa, why would someone leave you a ranch? You always said we don't have much, just what we need to survive." Boone sighed. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll find out." The letter, written in shaky handwriting, explained everything. Too much, and yet not enough. "You inherit my ranch and everything on it. Look for what I couldn't take with me. The answer is where the old oak stands alone." It was signed simply, Malachi Brooks. Attached to the letter was the deed to 200 acres of land. Boone's hand trembled as he looked at the paper. 200 acres? He had never even thought about owning land beyond the small farm they barely kept afloat. The ranch was in the middle of nowhere, what the county records called unproductive land. Boone had no idea what that meant, but it didn't matter. It was a place, a thing that he didn't deserve, but had nonetheless been handed. He looked at the lawyer's note again. Malachi Brooks had been a hermit, lived alone for 30 years, and passed away without any close family. The letter's instructions didn't make much sense to Boone. He was supposed to inherit a broken-down piece of property from someone he had never met, with only cryptic instructions to guide him. He put the letter down. Clarabelle was still watching him, her young eyes wide with confusion. "Papa, what do we do now?" she asked. Boone ran a hand through his hair. "We go and see it for ourselves, I guess." 2 days later, Boone found himself riding a wagon toward the address listed on the deed. Clarabelle sat beside him, her face pressed against the side of the wagon, her curiosity about this strange inheritance growing with every mile they traveled. Rusty, the dog, bounced beside them, barking at anything that moved. Boone couldn't help but feel a knot of worry in his chest, but he didn't know if it was fear or simply the realization that there was no turning back. The journey was long, the land barren, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. As they neared the ranch, Boone's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected much, but when he saw the property for the first time, he was struck by just how desolate it looked. The house was little more than a skeletal frame, the wood rotting and falling apart in places. The barn, once sturdy, was now only a shadow of its former self. The fields, once fertile and full of promise, had long since been abandoned to the unforgiving droughts that had plagued the area for years. "This place is nothing like I imagined," Boone muttered, staring at the broken-down ranch house. Clarabelle kicked at a rusted metal box half buried near the porch. "What's this, Papa?" Boone stood there for a moment, unsure whether to feel anger or resignation. The letter had promised something, but this land? This ranch? It didn't look like a blessing. It felt more like a burden. He bent down to investigate the metal box. It was old, the rust eating away at the edges, but inside, something caught his attention. A hand-drawn map, strange symbols that he didn't understand, and a photograph of a man who looked eerily similar to him. The picture, faded and yellowed, showed a man dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing outside a structure that appeared to be this very ranch. The man's face looked familiar, but Boone couldn't place him. He squinted, trying to remember, but his mind drew a blank. Rusty barked from the tree line, his attention focused on something there. Boone's heart skipped a beat as he turned, instinctively pulling Clarabelle closer to him. Following the dog's lead, they ventured towards the old oak tree, the one mentioned in the letter. The tree was old, its bark marked with time. As Boone approached, he noticed something carved deep into its surface. The same symbols from the map were etched into the wood, weathered but still legible. Below the symbols, a set of initials caught his eye. Boone's heart clenched as he traced the initials with his finger. E.C. Eleanor Carter, his mother's name. Eleanor, who had died when he was just a boy, had never mentioned an uncle named Malachi, never mentioned any family other than the one they had. He had grown up with her stories, the ones about buried treasure and family secrets, the ones he had dismissed as fairy tales, meant to ease the pain of losing his father at such a young age. But this was real. Malachi had been his uncle. And the ranch was more than just land. It was a message, a clue, a long-forgotten family secret that had been waiting for the right moment. The first shovel of dirt told Boone everything he needed to know. The ground was hard, baked by years of drought. Every strike of the shovel felt like a battle. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the map again. The symbols seemed to mock him. Clarabelle kicked at the dirt around the old oak tree and noticed a key. It was heavy, more than it should have been for something so old. "Papa, this key is heavy. It feels strange." She handed it to him, and Boone noticed the engravings along the shaft. Numbers, coordinates maybe? He didn't know, but the mystery deepened with every moment. They had no choice but to search the house again, to check every corner, every nook. The house was empty, just as he expected. Dust, cobwebs, and the unmistakable smell of abandonment filled the air. It was as if the house itself had given up long ago. But then Clarabelle found something. A loose floorboard near the back bedroom. She pulled it up, revealing a leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. Boone's hands trembled as he opened it, seeing the familiar handwriting of Malachi Brooks on the yellowed pages. The entries were cryptic, but pointed toward something Boone hadn't expected. Malachi had been a collector of rare coins, treasures passed down through the generations. But there was more than just coins. There were hints of something more valuable, something hidden and protected. The journal also mentioned Eleanor, his mother. Malachi had known that someday Boone might need what was hidden, that the key, the map, and the symbols were all part of a larger plan. What was Uncle Malachi hiding? Clara asked, her voice full of curiosity. Boone didn't know, but one thing was clear. Malachi had been waiting for Boone to find the ranch, to discover the truth. As the day wore on, the mystery deepened. It was clear that this inheritance was more than a piece of land. It was a key to something far greater. But what? Boone closed the door softly, his fingers trembling as they brushed over the journal. Clara watched him intently, the unease from their visitor still lingering in the air. She had seen the look in Thornton's eyes when he saw the journal, that flicker of recognition or perhaps greed. The whole encounter felt wrong, too slick, too rehearsed. "What do you think he really wants, Papa?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Boone rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I'm not sure yet, but we can't afford to make any mistakes." He turned the journal over in his hands, the leather now worn and cracked, its edges curling as though it too had weathered decades of neglect. The next morning came too quickly, with no answers and no peace. The sun rose over the land, casting long shadows across the broken-down ranch house. Boone had not slept well, his mind racing with thoughts of Thornton Chasoffer and the cryptic clues in Malachi's journal. The mention of the treasure, the collection. Was it just a pile of rare coins, or was it something more, something the men surrounding them had yet to discover? The old ranch house creaked in the early morning light, as if the very bones of the house were groaning under the weight of all the secrets it had stored for so many years. Boone felt the same. As much as he wanted to just walk away from all of it and live a simple life with Clara, he knew deep down that they had to keep going. They had no choice now. Clara had been quieter than usual that morning, her face serious as she scanned the journal. "Papa, we need to look for more," she said, the determination in her voice unmistakable. "I think we missed something yesterday." Boone stared at her, his eyes narrowing as he thought about the map, the strange symbols, and the multiple locks they had yet to unlock. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe there was more buried here than just the land. They spent the rest of the day searching through the house and the barn, combing through old papers and broken crates. But the search turned up little. The only clue that seemed to lead anywhere was the map, which led to the old oak tree at the edge of the property. But they had already searched that area, and the only thing they had found there was the metal box that seemed impossible to move. As the day wore on, Boone began to feel the weight of his options. The ranch, with its broken walls and empty rooms, was a far cry from the bustling farm he'd once dreamed of. The debts from the bank were piling up, threatening to take away everything he'd worked so hard for. And yet, here was this inheritance, this mysterious legacy that seemed to hold the promise of everything they needed. The 200 acres, the treasure hidden beneath the earth, the possibility of wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But what price would they have to pay for it? That evening, Boone sat down in front of the house, gazing at the long stretch of land that stretched out before him. The ranch had once been thriving. He could feel the ghost of its past success hanging in the air, like a memory that hadn't quite faded. He turned to Clara, who had been silent for most of the day, her eyes distant as she stared at the horizon. "Clara," Boone said softly, his voice breaking the silence, "I think we need to find the key." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What key?" Boone pulled the journal from his coat pocket and opened it to a page near the back. The handwriting was frail, the ink faded with age, but it was still readable. One sentence stood out from the rest. "The collection is buried with the key. You'll find it where the oak tree stands, but there's a price and it won't be an easy road." Clara leaned over his shoulder and read the words aloud. "A price?" Boone nodded, his face grim. "I don't know what it means, but we're not the only ones after whatever's hidden here. Richard Thornton's company wouldn't have come all this way if they didn't know something we didn't. He paused, thinking about the way Thornton had looked at Clara when he first arrived, the way his gaze had lingered on the journal. It was clear that Thornton was no ordinary businessman. He was well-connected, ruthless, and he had been watching the property for far longer than Boone cared to think about. "We need to go back to the oak tree," Boone said, standing up and brushing the dust off his pants. "Something's waiting there, and I don't think it's just the collection. There's something else, something we're missing." Clara nodded, her determination matching his. Together they grabbed the journal and made their way to the tree. As they approached, the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting the land in a golden hue. The oak tree stood tall and ancient, its gnarled roots digging deep into the earth. It was silent now, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the branches. Boone looked at the spot where they had dug the day before. The metal box was still there, partially uncovered. It seemed heavier now, as though it had gained weight overnight. Boone and Clara both dropped to their knees, their hands moving instinctively to finish what they had started. But just as Boone was about to lift the box again, he froze. A sound, a whisper in the air. Clara's eyes widened as she looked around, her hand instinctively gripping her father's arm. "Papa, do you hear that?" Boone's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" The sound grew louder, almost like a voice carried by the wind. It wasn't a voice they could understand, but it was enough to make the hair on the back of Boone's neck stand up. Something was stirring beneath the earth, as if the land itself was waking up to greet them. "Papa," Clara whispered, "I think it's time." Boone took a deep breath and stood up, his eyes never leaving the spot where they had been digging. Time for what? But before Clara could answer, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A crack appeared in the earth, running straight through the tree's roots, splitting the ground wide open. A sudden, violent pull yanked the metal box from the earth with a force so strong that it almost seemed like the land itself was trying to reject it. Boone stumbled backward, but Clara reached out and grabbed the box, her hands shaking as she held it tightly. The box was heavy, far heavier than it had any right to be. Clara looked up at her father, her face pale with shock. Papa, I think we found it. Boone nodded, his heart racing as he stepped forward to take the box from her. They hadn't just found a collection, they had found something far more valuable, but they had also found something far more dangerous, something that would change their lives forever. As Boone carefully pried open the box, he could feel the weight of the secrets it held. Coins, yes, but more than just coins. Artifacts, maps, and letters, all tied to a legacy that stretched back generations. The first item he picked up was a small, worn notebook, its leather cover cracked and faded. As he flipped through the pages, his fingers froze on a particular entry. The real treasure isn't in the coins themselves. It's in the knowing. Boone's eyes widened as the meaning of the words sank in. This wasn't just a treasure hunt. It was a test that Malachi had prepared for them long before they had ever stepped foot on this land. But now, with the box in their hands and the path ahead uncertain, Boone and Clara realized that the real test was only just beginning. In Part 2, the mystery deepens as Boone and Clara discover the true nature of Malachi's inheritance and the danger it holds. They begin to understand the price of the treasure they've uncovered and what it might mean for their future. The suspense builds, leaving them on the edge of a life-changing decision.